Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be covering the 14.10 jungle tier list. So if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. Once again, this is targeting towards mid elo. I'll mainly be talking about what are the best things to climb throughout, let's say, plat to like diamond. You can kind of use it as a basis for that. It covers a bit of low elo, as a lot of things tend to be pretty good across that skill bracket. And then elite champions tend to be a bit lower down, as they tend to be harder to pull off and less consistent than some of the other picks if you haven't put the games into them. So let's get into it. To begin with, the D tier is going to consist of Silas. Silas obviously had a couple of buffs pushed his way to kind of like enable him to be a bit more of a viable jungler. He really hasn't hit the mark. He still underperformed, so he is going to maintain a spot on the D tier. If you are able to get ahead early and then snowball your clear, then you can function as a jungler, but you are very predicated on early gold advantages. You need to get lane snowballing. If you get invaded, put behind, it's very hard to pilot this champion. He sits in the D tier. Rengar is one of the biggest must avoids for mid and low elo players. Playing this champion like early on into your climb can be quite challenging. He's obviously a very hard to pilot champion. Builds are kind of differing on this pick at the moment. Obviously, Essence Reaver no longer has Sheen built into it, so you can no longer really go that route. But there are other options. Of course, like IE feels really nice to go at the moment. It's been put in a relatively good spot. That combined with some of the other crit changes, you can kind of flex around your build, lethality crit. But I would avoid this champion for the moment. He's like in the worst spot he's been for being mid and low elo friendly. And then Shen. Shen obviously was popularized by LS relatively recently. It's not a great pick to play within solo queue, like unless you're at a very high rank and you can kind of rely on your teammates. He is obviously entirely predicated on your teammates doing well and having advantages. If you're not able to consistently like have someone to really pull snowball around, then you are guaranteed to lose the game. This pick has next to no individual carry potential, and he sits in the D tier for the most part. He doesn't win a huge amount of games in mid and low elo. It's something I would recommend avoiding unless you're consistently playing for like a duo, or you have or you're like climbing quite high up into the ranks. Moving on to the C tier, Maokai is basically off the jungle tier list at this point. He is the least popular jungler, which I have here. His popularity is massively fallen since he's just not really that great in the jungle anymore. His clear is slow. He's not got the greatest itemization. He's weaker than he has been, obviously. Support nerfs have kind of dragged jungle Maokai down, and he now sits within the C tier. Zed obviously has a really aggressive clear. The passive doing 200% damage to monsters with no cooldown gives him a lot of power here, but he doesn't really have the same consistency. He's hard to pull off. You're really only going to see this champion if you are playing from mid to jungle and you're really comfortable on the pick and understand the win con of the champion. Master Yi is in a really bad spot at the moment. The removal of lethal tempo combined with nerfs at the end of last split have really hurt this champion. He's just not really found his footing yet. He's one of the weakest, not easy to play junglers, but like what should be one of the more like newer player friendly junglers to play. And yeah, I'd recommend avoiding the pick for the moment. Lee Sin obviously had his win rate massively inflated by the fact that there was a bug on his Q. It had a 200% AD ratio instead of a 140% bonus AD ratio. Of course, now that that's been patched and all of his items got nerfed at the end of the last split, he now sits within the C tier. Not something I'd really recommend at the moment. You're going to see a lot of champions which got nerfed towards the end of the last split with their items being a bit weaker, get put down the tier list a bit, and obviously there are some champions which can abuse some of the new items. Blackfire Torch, obviously within this space, tends to be pretty strong. However, not as strong as people think it is, especially after the hotfix. The Andrews is still very good on a lot of the picks, but I'll cover that in a minute. Hecarim, still underperforming. This champion's massively needed, has desperately needed buffs for a couple of, almost the entirety of last split. He is still primarily going Shojin first, and then you can kind of itemize around that, whether that's like your opportunity, your stride breaker, your eclipse, stuff like this. But he's still underperforming at the moment for a relatively easy to play pick. He's in the C tier. And then Lily and Eve, very, very high elo skewed picks. You're not really going to see these champions in mid and low. They will massively underperform for the most part. On both these picks, you're very reliant on Medjay and just snowballing through games. That's kind of your win con. Closing out around the mid game, whether that's through dragon stacking or getting your dark harvest stacks and then snowballing and just killing your opponent a huge amount and then forcing them to FF, or just sieging. You've kind of got different routes, but I would recommend avoiding these picks at the moment. They are not the greatest way to consistently win games. They're hard to pilot, and they have been nerfed down to the point where yeah, they're not great mid-elo picks. And then the final champion, actually no, that is going to wrap up the C tier. Moving on to the B tier, I have Talon here. He's not performing as well in the jungle as he has done in the past. He's still fine here, though. Once again, kind of akin to Zed. He's more of a mid to jungle flex. This pick is easier to pilot than the Zed. It's more predicated on invading and just like being able to take over the enemy jungle on top of your own. When his W had a really aggressive bonus monster mod on it, it was really impressive to play against this pick. Obviously, he could poach away a lot of your jungle, and it would be very hard to like play against it. But obviously, it's been nerfed to the point where only the good talents are really going to find those level advantages. It's a bit more niche. It kind of sits towards the bottom of the B tier. At least still underperforms at the moment. Also sitting towards the bottom of the B tier. She just performs better than a lot of the C tier options, whether that's through being a bit easier to play, like your early game being very strong and like more visibly strong, and then using your cocoon to like have some sort of impact. Whereas Eve and Lily is a bit harder to find that level of just instant impact. Of course, Charm in Eve's case can be that. But yeah, Lily, at least going to sit towards the bottom of the B tier. You're still looking at like your Lich Banes. Storm Surge doesn't seem to be as performant on some of these AP junglers. Kha'Zix is going to also sit towards the bottom of the bottom of the B tier. He doesn't spike particularly hard of one item, but once you get your 2, 3, he spikes really nicely in the mid game. Once you have your first and your second evolves, whether it's your W, your Q for clear speed, stuff like that. W, of course, nice AoE slow. Can be quite impressive to play against. That's kind of where his power comes in. A bit harder to pilot. You want to be really like focusing on your isolated 1v1s, using him more of a counter pick. But he's still a solid B tier option. If you can like consistently find advantages on this champion and you're good at it, then yeah, he can be a very solid like A S tier option if you put the games in. Trundle, for one of the easiest champions to play in the game, he's definitely underperforming the jungle again. It's something I would really recommend avoiding, whether that's through his items just being nerfed a bit, where like your Sundered Sky, if you do end up going that route, Trinity not being as good this last split, Sterix being nerfed down. But reasons for it, but yeah, Trundle, for how easy he is to play, he's just not finding that level of performance you'd like, but he's still solid against AD bruisers and some of the tanks within the jungle pool. Teemo is going to be here. Teemo, obviously, his simplicity, his scaling is really where his power comes in. He's not I mean, his clear speed is also really impressive. The 200% damage to monsters on the E-Poison, combined with the double duration blind on the Q, gives him, like, relatively simplistic clears. It's very hard to die as Teemo jungle. Your biggest concern is obviously being invaded, but once you're at 6, you can actively act as, like, a duelist in a lot of circumstances. Even pre-6, if you're running the likes of PTA, and, like, your isolated 1v1s aren't bad if you're able to use your blind to block a lot of the damage. There is value there. Of course, this pick does massively fall off the higher up in rank you go, but he's still a very solid option. Shyvana, it's still underperformant for a low elo champion. Should be higher win rate. Obviously, you want to see this pick consistently at like your 52s. It's very telegraphed what she wants to do. Your dragon stacking, playing on your ultimate and your 6. Before that, she's very easy to pick off, doesn't have great isolated 1v1 power, a bit more reliant on the 2v2. Of course, if this pick snowballs, then there is power there. You can go the AP route, you can go like the Shojin, Liandry, Riftmaker route as well. Both these are solid options, but she's still underperforming, so I'm going to leave her in the B tier at the moment. Gragas, very elite skewed pick, has been being able to, displacement tends to be a bit more of a high-low skewed kind of like CC lever, as whether you get like the consistency to follow up on it can be the value in it of itself. Gragas also an AP snowballer, also tends to be a bit more elite skewed. The likes of Elise, Lily, Eve, relatively similar. His clear's not too bad. And yeah, that's kind of where his power comes in. You want to finish games out early. You're still looking at like your Lich Bane, Storm Surge if you're snowballing, Rabadon, Magi, stuff like that. It's still a solid B tier option. Poppy, lost a bit of power with Sundered Sky being enough, but if you're going the Sundered Sky Deadman's route, she definitely climbs up in the tier list. You want to be using this pick as a counter option rather than blind, whether that's into the likes of Lee Sim, where you can really easily shut this champion down. That's kind of where the power comes in, but she sits in the B tier for the moment. There are better, more consistent options than her. Sejuani definitely had a bit of a spike. I'm actually going to put Sejuani towards the bottom of the B tier. Obviously, this was with the health ratio stuff, which like really helped her when you are giga health stacking and getting a lot of gold income. It's still not really put her in the best of spots. She's still underperforming. You're very reliant on synergies and being a bit more synergistic with your laners. Whether this is through the likes of having a Camille in the top lane and being able to play off that. Camille, Aurelia, Fiora. You can kind of function around your E passive on all of those. But yeah, for the most part, not really great for trying to solo carry a game or like being a relatively strong carry. If you want something a bit easier, the likes of Mumu, and a bit more impact, then yeah, I mean, we can also fit that space. So Sejuani going to sit within the middle of the B tier. Graves, also an elite skewed pick, elite skewed AD pick, tends to be a bit underperformant when they nerfed the Yomus for range champions. He did get his crit ratios buffed back up to try and help him, encourage him to go down crit routes, and it's done a decent amount for when you're like 3-4 items. He can spike really nicely later into the game, and oftentimes it's just one-shot squishy targets, and that's kind of where a lot of power comes in. But that tends to be a bit more of a novelty rather than something you're gonna consistently get, which yeah makes it a kind of hard win con to achieve. Obviously you want to snowball, you want to get a lot of income going, being able to clear your jungle quickly, and running things like Treasure Hunter. I would recommend avoiding cashback at the moment. I don't believe this rune is in the greatest spot. If they buff it up, then it will definitely have a lot more value, but 6% is a bit too low. But yeah, you have kind of options there, but he's going to sit within the B tier for the moment. Kane also going to sit here. Blue Kane probably sits closer to C tier. Red Kane sits higher to A. Obviously for Red Kane you're going like your Eclipse, your Cleaver, and then you can go some like bruisery items. Obviously his passive now has a health scaling on it rather than being level scaling, which encourages your health buying. Obviously Sterix can fit quite nicely in that. Overlord's Bloodmail can also fit as a 4/5 item, but he still underperforms to a degree, so I'm going to leave him within the B tier. Red Kane, low elo skewed. Blue Kane tends to be a bit more high elo skewed. I'd recommend defaulting on Red Kane and not really opting into Blue Kane if you're looking to consistently climb with this pick. Kindred, once again, an elite skew pick. You're reliant on invading, stacking your marks, being able to single out targets. Mark moving tends to be a bit more of a skill, which requires a lot of games to like master. Obviously, your build's a bit weaker. Kraken Slayer just isn't quite. I mean, Kraken Slayer is relatively similar. Like for Kindred, you're not as reliant on crit. You can go like your Kraken into your Trinity, Kraken into like crit variations. Kind of depends on what you want in that game, but she still underperforms within mid elo, so I'm going to leave her within the B tier. Belveth, also an elite skew pick, very reliant on like Raptors invading, being able to poach enemy jungle. Her Q has now got a massive amplifier to jungle camps, and her dueling has kind of been nerfed down to take away from to like move her, shift her power around. Obviously, she's a bit more early game skewed. They're trying to adjust that, push her towards late game with like some of the changes they've done more recently, but she's still like in that space. Kraken Slayer into Strikebreaker tended to be what people were going. I believe that is still probably similar to what you're going to be going, whether you're picking up your Cleaver now within like 3rd, 4th slot, because that item has been buffed and definitely helps with your E Shred, where you can fast E applying. Yutao quick arrows. Wait, no, I got the wrong. Quick Blades. No, I've also got the wrong one there. The new bleed crit item has some funky interactions with Belveth's E. I will remember the name of it at some point. But I don't know if you go it specifically, but there are definitely like build variations. Whether like Belveth's win rate rises when people like min-max her build and get the kind of like right variations down and like what they want within the game. But she's going to sit within the B tier at the moment. I tend to recommend avoiding this champion, as she tends to be a bit more elite skewed, but she has for the most part been relatively strong in mid and low elo since her release. She's just not as performant at the moment. Skarner is going to sit within the B tier. Skarner is an elite skewed tank. He is very much beforehand he was a bit reliant on getting kills, getting your Heartsteel procs. They've nerfed down his health ratios, but he's still definitely going to be within the elite space. Putting time into playing this champion, getting the clears right, making sure you know your E's and your combos, all tend to be a bit more elite skewed, and will sit in that kind of like space as a tank. Obviously, when you are building, when you do build as a tank on Skarner, it converts a lot of that damage into into raw power. Obviously, the Q has a pretty aggressive AD ratio on health to damage ratio on it, and that is where a lot of his power lies. His burst can be quite oppressive if you're snowballing. If you want to pick up a champion, I mean, I would recommend it, but be careful, he might get nerfed again. It kind of depends on like where they want Skarner to kind of lie as a champion, and like his top to jungle kind of like balance power shift. Shaco, I would recommend playing AP Shaco at the moment. It tends to outperform AD Shaco. This is, of course, on the new item, Black Fire Torch. It is performing quite well on Shaco. And then you opt into things like Leandries. It gives you a lot of like objective control. It makes it very hard for people to enter. Obviously, if you're playing into a lot of melees who can't consistently break your boxes, there is a lot of power in that, and it can be very oppressive to play against this champion. I'd recommend that. Of course, you can still go like Lethality Shaco. You're very much reliant on snowballing then. If you can catch people out, then that can all go quite nicely. But yeah, definitely a lot more early game skewed, whereas AP Shaco tends to be a bit more late game skewed and tends to be a bit better within mid and low elo. Nunu also going to be within this space. He, of course, is running either Sunfires or Liandry's. Both these items work quite nicely on him. Whether you're going down a more tanky route or you're trying to have a bit more impact, picking up a bit of AP, Liandry, Dark Seal, stuff like that. His AP ratios are pretty aggressive at this point. They have buffed them up quite a bit. But yeah, he tends to underperform compared to some of the other tanks. Yeah, that's kind of the space he lies in at the moment. Wukong, great scaling pick, has a really strong spike at Sundered Sky. Once you have your Trinity and your Sundered Sky down, this champion is very powerful. Of course, before that, you tend to be a bit weaker. You don't quite have the dueling power you need against a lot of the junglers. But if you're playing into a lot of the AD picks, you're getting your items down, like second item Sundered Sky, third item Steric, stuff like this, then there is a lot of power in this pick. His team fighting is really oppressive. Of course, the double ultimate gives him a lot of power there. And he can definitely climb up the tier list, but you have to be aware of his scaling. If you don't, if you try to play him as like an early game duelist, you'll fall flat, and he will not have anywhere near as much power as you perceive him to have. Mordekaiser is going to start off the A tier. He is definitely benefiting from the changes last split where he had his ultimate, so it can no longer be Q accessible. He lost 10 damage flat on his E, but he gained 1 second early game on the Q, which helps his clear speed. Overall, that is a buff towards Mordekaiser's clear speed. Like early on, later on, it's a bit of a nerf, but he can kind of work around that. He can function quite nicely as a jungler. Tends to be a bit more low and mid elo skewed. This pick can, it's relatively telegraphed. Good players tend to kite him a bit easier and like play around his ultimate a bit more. But he can function quite nicely with a mid elo, a solid A tier pick. Morgana has definitely risen in power. Definitely one of the biggest winners of Blackfire Torch being added. Blackfire Torch into Liandry's works really nicely on this pick. Allows you to clear your jungle really quickly. Gives you a lot of power when like running into team fights. Allows you to output a lot of damage. Not the greatest solo carry champion, but yeah, can definitely output a huge amount of damage. If you're able to consistently land your bindings, there's a lot of power in that. And yeah, a really solid A tier pick. Great clear speed. Udyr, once again, you're mainly going down your like Liandry's into tank variations to Udyr. This will be like Liandry's, Deadman's, and then you can go like Fawn, maybe Abyssal, Jackshow, stuff like that. Of course, Abyssal has been changed, so now that it's 20% magic shred, so you tend to opt into this item when you have a solid AP option on your team. Who's maybe carrying and you want to like support them a bit, but he kind of sits within the A tier. AD Udyr tends to be a bit weaker, but it's still a viable build. Yeah, solid A tier option. Sak also going to be the A tier. He is a great top laner, not as performant within the jungle. The changes were into the split were relatively power neutral. Obviously, he values haste quite heavily. That was something they added to Sunfires. And he can still operate quite nicely on the item. He also still operates really nicely on Liandry. That is still something you can opt into if you're looking for a bit more power and control within the game. Still a very solid A tier AP tank option. Does a decent amount of damage, so yeah. Echo, and honestly, I'm going to put Echo and Diana next to each other. They're not performing as well this split as they were last split. I believe I've dropped Diana down from the S to the A tier. She obviously received some buffs in the middle of last split, which helped her attack speed, allowed her to clear a bit better. You're still going like your Nashes into Lichbane. I believe that is the same case for Echo. It helps with their clear speed, allows them to be solid duelists. The picks just aren't as consistently snowballing. There are some of the top champs obviously swamping them a bit. Karthus is incredibly oppressive and probably the best go-to AP option at the moment, I would recommend. But these two picks, still very solid, just not as S-tier worthy as some of the other picks. Moving on, we have Briar. So Briar is still a very solid AD option. She got nerfed towards the end of last split. I believe twice they nerfed her W at the later ranks, but like kind of gave it a bit of compensation early. And then she received some other nerfs to kind of bring her down for low elo. Is that where she was overperforming? Briar tends to be a bit low, mid elo skewed, and then tends to be a bit weaker within higher ranks. Obviously, her W locks you onto a target and kind of does a lot of the work for you. You're looking at like Titanics and Sky variations, and then you can opt into things like Starex and like some of the other Bruiser builds, but she's not as performant as she once was. Still a very solid A tier AD option. Rammus, great counterpick. One of the best junglers if you have him in a counterpick situation. tends to fall a bit flat as like a blind option, but yeah, he's definitely like an S plus counter pick, more like a B tier blind, so I'm going to leave him within the A tier for the moment. Still spikes really hard off form mail, that item is great for him, and yeah, that tends to be the route you go. Vi, also going to sit within the A tier, a great solo like anti-carry option. You can obviously pick out targets really nicely. For jungle, you tend to, for solo queue, you tend to run more of your Halo Blades, tend to be a bit more bursty. PT can function on Vi. I do believe PT is a bit on the weak side, and they will probably buff it to the next patch. But yeah, Vi, Halo Blades, play like an assassin, like anti-carry option, and you should find a decent amount of success. Viego, drop down from the S tier to the A tier. The new Kraken Slayer without the crit has definitely hurt him. Obviously, Viego has crit ratios within his kit, which give him a lot of power. Losing that has definitely hurt him, and it brings him down from the S to the A tier. But if you're able to snowball, you have someone on your team who can like chunk targets down, and then you can get your resets, get your executes. He's a great pick. But yeah, it's not as consistently. It's not going to consistently as happen as consistently as it once did. Jesus Christ. But yeah, he's a bit weaker with the new Kraken Slayer. It's honestly put Kraken Slayer and Bork as relatively close options for him. Moving on, we have Warwick. So Warwick is still really nice on both Titanic and Stridebreaker. Stridebreaker Warwick tends to be a bit more unpopular, but tends to be a bit more performant. Obviously, the Bork changes also helped Warwick quite nicely. Bork as an item is just generalistically stronger, so some of its uses are a bit more performant now. And yeah, Warwick is a solid A tier option, tends to be a bit more mid, low elo skewed. Your biggest strength is just like the deception and like where his power lies. Obviously, he's incredibly strong early game. You want to be getting these isolated 1v1s where you can use the power of your sustain, use the power of your ultimate, and then like 2v2s can also work quite nicely if you're able to like help out your teammate and like do a huge chunk of damage and kind of act as like a semi frontline option. He's not like a pure frontline option. He will get bursted down, especially later on into the game. But yeah, he's still a solid A tier pick. Jarvan and Xin Zhao are going to go next to each other. Both these picks are very good staple AD options. If you want go-to staple ADs, then these are two very solid picks. Their simplicity, their setup can like really enable people. As individual champions, they're not great carry options. You're not really going to be able to snowball games with these picks like by yourself. But if you can play around lanes and you're working with a duo, then these two champions are great for that. But yeah, Xin Zhao has a bit more solo carry potential than Jarvan. Jarvan is a bit more reliant on setup and like pairings, but yeah, both these picks are great within their own space. Jax usually opted into as like a counter pick into the likes of Xin Zhao and like other auto attack based champions. He can work quite nicely in the space as like a mid as a top jungle flex option. But yeah, utilize him as a counter pick. Should have a decent amount of success. And yeah, if you put the games in, he can work quite nicely. Still works really well on like your Trinity, and then AD Bruiser options, Shojin, Steric, stuff like that. Fiddlesticks, obviously a bit more niche compared to some of the other picks here, but still a very solid AP option. You're still going down either the route of like your Malignance, your Rocket Bell. I imagine he functions quite nicely on the current item. He works quite well on the Andres. That tends to be something people don't opt into enough. And yeah, Fiddlesticks, reliable pick, can turn games quite quickly in his favor. If you're able to land like 4-man Crow Storms, and yeah, you have a lot of power in that. Rek'Sai, still a very solid jungler. Like, I've dropped her down from the S to the A tier, as there are some really solid S tier options, which I'd really recommend at the moment. And Rek'Sai just doesn't quite fit in amongst them, but she's still a great pick. Obviously, lost a bit of damage, but gained a bit more durability. Her AoE knockup is really valuable, especially if you're able to find like good flank angles onto comps. The comparison obviously is Stridebreaker, Titanic. You kind of want to opt into the one which you need within the game. Whether you need that slow and movement speed, obviously Stridebreaker can work quite nicely in that space. Titanic tends to be a bit better as a burst option, gives you a bit more upfront durability. And yeah, you kind of got to pick around these two things. Rumble is going to be made here. Rumble is still an incredibly strong jungle pick. I really recommend people pick up Rumble jungle. This champion is really slept on. Like, he has a really strong clear speed. He has great dueling potential. His gank setup isn't that bad. Like, having a slow on the E, slow on the R, W movement speed does a huge amount of damage. Yeah, this pick is really slept on. I'd really recommend putting games onto him and just see if you can find success. Obviously, if you struggle with the pick, once again, like all these picks here, I wouldn't really recommend it. Look for other things which suit your playstyle. But yeah, Rumble, definitely a slept-on pick at the moment. Really solid jungle A tier option. Ivan going to get dropped down from the S to the A tier. A lot of people are making the mistake of going Moonstone first on Ivan. I would always recommend going Redemption, but item really performs quite well on him. Make sure you're picking up your Dark Seal, and then you can pick up things like your Moonstone as like a second option, and then you go down like the supportive route. If you're going down like the Redemption first option, he probably jumps back up to the S tier, but as people are kind of like going wrong with his builds at the moment, he sits at the top of the A tier. Moving on to the S tier options, so we have Volibear. Volibear, a incredibly strong early game, easy to play option, probably the best go-to, like alongside Amumu, two of the best go-to like picks at the moment, as like really easy to play. Like you've been auto-filled into the jungle, you want to just be strong like as like either a team fighter or as like an early game champion in Volibear's case. His drawing potential with Cindered Sky and Deadbands is really impressive. He's great tower diving potential, great isolated 1v1 potential. You stack Drakes or you can stack your Grubs and then snowball the game, close out relatively early, and you should be good to go. Still a great S tier option. Taliyah is going to be in the S tier. So Taliyah works really nicely on Blackfire Torch. Taliyah was already really strong on Liandry. People weren't going it enough, but like now that people are actually opting into Blackfire Torch and then Liandry's, this champion has definitely shown that it is very strong within the jungle. I spoke about it last, in most jungle tier lists about the strength of Taliyah, how it was really strong on Liandry, but yeah, now that people are opting into it, there's a lot of power in this pick. Tends to be strong as like a counter option into lots of mobility, but you can still just play this pick as like a AP jungle carry option, and you should still find a decent amount of success. Nocturne, stop going Hexplate, go Stridebreaker. This pick is incredibly strong if you go Stridebreaker into Hexplate instead of going Hexplate into like whatever you go. Like I would just recommend always going Stridebreaker first, or Polar Claw. Like honestly, if you're able to get like a consistent snowball pattern and like you're really like stomping in low elo, then yeah, you can go not Polar Skull, Profane Hydra. Then you can go like a really solid like lethality one shot option. But if you want something really cookie cutter, really easy to play around, Stridebreaker, Hexplate, Cleaver, and then you can go like defensive options, defensive AD options, and yeah, you should be really good to go. This champ is really strong at the moment, and people are really sleeping on it. Moving on to the last three picks on the S tier, so we have Brand. Brand is still a really strong AP snowball option. Obviously, I've dropped him down from the S plus tier to the S tier. He isn't quite a strong early game. That is something people have to be aware of. This pick isn't quite as strong there, but he still works really nicely on Liandry. People are overbuying Blackfire Torch. It is still a very solid option. You can go at like second item, but yeah, you still want to go your Liandry. You still want your Rylai. Blackfire Torch works really nicely within like the space. There's like a burn option for Brand, but not so good as like a first item. Liandry is still definitely has the crown in that space. But yeah, still a very solid AP option. Amumu, also an incredibly good, easy to play option. You can either go your Liandry or your Sunfires. Both these items can work quite nicely depending on what you want. If you want a bit more carry potential, Liandry's really good for that. If you want a bit more durability, Sunfires into like tank options can work quite nicely. I would personally recommend going Liandry's. You want to snowball, you want to climb the ranks, and yeah, you should find a decent amount of success on this pick. Very easy to play, great recommendable jungler. Probably what I would recommend as like the go-to jungler if you're learning to pick up the role. And then Lilia kind of leads the S tier, very close to the S plus tier, but there is a champ which is like really overperforming at the moment. But yeah, once again, works really nicely on Blackfire and Liandry, and then you can pick up your Rylai, pick up your Rift Maker, and yeah, the champ's in a really good spot at the moment. Should find a lot of success, especially if you play a lot of Lilia. And then Karthus is solo in the S plus tier. Karthus is probably the biggest winner of Blackfire Torch this patch. He works really nicely with the item alongside the likes of Liandry. The snowball potential, make sure you're taking First Strike and Dark Harvest in the depending on what kind of game state you are. Whether you're like ulting early or you're ulting to like finish targets off, it kind of depends on that. But yeah, Karthus in a great spot at the moment. Tends to be a bit more mid, high, elo skewed and will get nerfed next patch, whereas the likes of Amumu probably won't be nerfed, and yeah, will probably be something I recommend a bit more, but Karthus is really strong at the moment. He's probably free LP if you do play the champion a lot, and yeah, you should find a lot of success. Those are my thoughts, so yeah. 40.10 border around a lot of changes. I'm covering this after the hotfix patch, and these are my thoughts. So, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next one. Goodbye.